We continue with Natalie. I'm very glad to meet you again. I know you as a strong advocate for basic income. We work together in an expert group from the Green European Foundation, and we met at the Basic Income Earth Network meeting in Finland 2 or 3 years ago. So glad to meet you again. And you have been President of the Green Party of England and Wales, and you have been member of the Parliament in the UK. So you are an absolutely expert, and I like to know how is discussion in the UK going on basic income. The Green Party, at least the Green Party of England and Wales, is in favor of a basic income. And what about the other people in England and Wales? What are the discussions now?
Well, it's lovely to see you again, Wolfgang, and to talk about an issue that's I've been passionate about for a long time. And indeed, it's something that I know encouraged lots of people to join the Green Party of England and Wales. And I want to just briefly address what Philippe said earlier, suggesting there wasn't a reason why this was specifically an environmentally focused policy. But I believe it is, certainly from our perspective. And I think I'll preface this by saying lots of our perspective comes from the fact that we are probably the second most neoliberal society in the world. So with America as the most neoliberal, neo-Thatcherite. And so we see the extreme conditions of consumption and the extreme conditions of insecurity. And that very much influences our view. But I think it also makes things very clear. So it's actually been England and Wales policy for 40 years. And it was very much started by a man who's not a left-winger, but an environmentalist who thought that if you give people security, the freedom from fear about worrying about being made homeless, left with nothing, left having to, as millions of people in the UK do, go to a food bank, then they wouldn't feel the need to accumulate so much stuff, to buy so much stuff, to compete so hard. So that's how it's seen as a green policy. But to answer your question about how things are going now in the UK, I'm going to divide this into pre-COVID and post-COVID-19. Pre-COVID-19, there was a real public groundswell. I was just looking back. I was doing a tour of the country. It seems very strange now. I was in crowded pubs with rooms with 150 people who'd come along to have a drink and listen to me talk about universal basic income. So there was a real groundswell of support. There's a movement that's known as UBI Labs, and they were starting to, around the UK, it's also international, but it's particularly strong in the UK, local groups starting up to campaign. They usually campaign for a trial of UBI in their community. Then we have COVID-19, and we've seen in the UK massive insecurity associated with that. There's 3 million people who in one way or another are self-employed, and many of them have been left with no money at all. People have just been left financially absolutely desperate. And the level of interest in UBI as providing that basic security has just gone through the roof. So we saw a month or so back, the Liberal Democrats who belong to Macron's what do they call it these days, Renew group, when we still had MEPs, the Liberal Democrats, often very a centrist party. It is now their party policy, and they trumpet it from the rooftops whenever they get the chance. We have a cross-party working group within the Parliament, so both members of the House of Lords, as I am, and MPs, but also people from all of the Northern Ireland Assembly, the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Parliament, and indeed local councillors. And that's a huge cross-party. We have everybody except the Tory, except the Conservative, involved in that group, campaigning very hard. And what UBI Labs are driving is we're now up to about 12 local governments in big cities like Liverpool and Sheffield, the Welsh Assembly. The way of expressing support for UBI is to call for a trial to be run in their area. And so we're up to about a dozen big local government authorities calling for a trial in the area. And we've really come an enormously long way that this is now utterly mainstream. If I go back to when I was party leader in 2015, we were on our own saying this. Now we're seeing significant parts of the Labour Party, so the Social Democrats in European terms, particularly younger Labour Party people, MPs, younger Labour Party members are very much in favour. There's a real generational split. And of course, reflecting on what Albina was saying from Finland, the unions are already very weak in the UK comparatively on a European scale. But here, they are also a barrier, but in a different kind of way, because a traditional Labour person thinks that your identity, who you are, should come from jobs. Whereas we say, you should be able to decide how you spend your time, your energy, your skills, your talents. And that might not be in something defined as a job. And just one final point to make is a lot of the people who are really suffering under COVID are creative people, musicians, theatre people, people who I think should be and may fit very comfortably as Green voters, but they haven't in the UK traditionally been that. But they're really seeing the attraction of UBI in that it's a way in which you can support yourself, get your basic needs met, and still pursue your passion, your career, develop that new album if you're a musician, or, develop that new theatre show or whatever, and UBI is there as a foundation for you. So I think the creative sector, I spoke to the Battersea Arts Club a couple of weeks back, and they really were pushing me to make sure they could get me to talk about this because they were so interested in it. So there is a huge amount of interest and a huge growing awareness of just insecurity that COVID's highlighted.
Yeah, thanks very much for this impression from the UK. We also have in Germany major discussions in the COVID-19 time, especially from self-employed and artists and so on. Sounds very interesting. And you also mentioned a lot of points which are linked to green positions: ecology, of course, social problems, creative scene, which is also a green thing, I think. And you mentioned in the chat an article on the feminist issue, and I'd like to ask you on that, because feminist is also a green principle to my point of view. So what can you say about the feminist issue of basic income?
Well, I have to confess I only wrote that article because I've always felt that, but I said to the Green European Foundation expert group, we must have an article in our book on this. And then everyone turned and looked at me and said, oh, you should write that. And in doing that, I found out something very interesting about British history, because at the end of the Second World War, as the welfare state was being established, there were actually quite a few women campaigning essentially for non-conditional, non-contributory benefits. And indeed, one of them said, when we got the system we have now, where your pension is dependent on what you've paid in, and as we were hearing from Finland, places where what benefits you might get depend on how much employment you might have had. They said that's a man's system for men. This was, of course, from a period when most women didn't have paid employment, certainly after they were married or had children. And so actually back then, women were saying, I might want to spend my life caring for children. I might spend a large chunk of my life caring for older relatives, in a situation where I'm devoting my life, spending my life in different ways. And that's something that, of course, it doesn't have to be that way, but that very often is what women end up doing. And women being, in lower paid jobs, working part-time, combining it with care responsibilities. And UBI, again, provides that security. And also, if you have a benefit system where every person is entitled to benefits rather than a household-based system, then what you have, the problem with the household system, of course, is just because money is going into a household doesn't mean the money is available to everyone. Whereas the UBI, by definition, goes to each individual person. And so that gives women a degree of security in a society that's so discriminatory as we have now, that I think it's really crucial. And I do just want to mention one other thing, because it was something I learned from talking to a 17-year-old, wonderful 17-year-old Polish young Green at a Young Greens event where I was talking about universal basic income. And he was saying to me that it's difficult in societies where action by the state is seen as a concern. The former communist behind the Iron Curtain states, it's difficult to campaign for UBI. And in talking to him, I developed what I find a really useful way of talking about this, which is if you take capitalism, our current system, the boss decides how you spend your time. If you take communist systems, and indeed some of the things that we were just hearing from Hungary, it's the state can tell you how you have to spend your time so that you can meet your needs. With UBI, you are free. That money goes to you as a matter of right as a member of this society. No one can take it away from you. No one can tell you how to spend your time, what you do. So this is actually a real measure of basic individual human freedom. It really is a transformatory point of human rights that we've said people have the right to life. And some societies don't guarantee that now, but more we're giving people the right to spend their time, talents, to use their lives in the way they want to. And that, is not something that we talk about enough, I don't think. I think we really need to focus more on the freedom side of it. And I think that fits very well with green political philosophy.
Thank you very much also for the latest aspects on feminists, and the point with the Polish women is a perfect bridge to the next interview, and I give it now to Laura.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. Perfect segue.